There it is, full time, Win Stadium. What a win. Smiles on the faces from ear to ear. The Dragons 30, the Warriors 12.
Kiraz! Kiraz! Back Kiraz, drink Shiraz. Scores in the corner, and the Doggies are going right on with it. 44 points to 12. They have smashed the Dragons.
Well, unless I go to the local A grade and get some players, I won't be making any changes. I don't want to be rude, but I've had enough. Thank you.
Well, he hasn't had enough, Shane Flanagan. What game was that? Do you recall which game that was after?
Was it Parramatta?
Okay.
Yeah, Parramatta. Yeah, that was. Yeah. I think
So that was the 44 points to 40 loss. And they scored 18 late points or something, didn't they?
That was an embarrassing performance.
And that was game 23. And this was the problem. At completion of game 21, Dragons in the 8.
Yeah.
So 3 games remaining. That was against the Sharks, the Eels, and the Raiders. All of them winnable games, right? The Sharks one was at Win Stadium and 3 straight losses. So that was the concern around that. They ended up finishing 11th, the St George Illawarra Dragons, 11 wins and 13 losses. They had a horrible for and against. And we talk about that with those big losses. It's 38-10 against the Sharks in that third last game, minus 126. Mick, how did you see the Dragon season?
Yeah, I think you can look at the Dragon season in 2 ways. If you go back to this time last year and you said, in the last 2 or 3 rounds, they could have controlled their own destiny and finished in the top 8.
Yep.
Even if they just missed out, you'd say that's huge improvements. Massive tick for the Dragons. And then you get to the midway point of the year and they're in the 8, they're playing some decent footy. And then the last month, it all capitulates. You go, it was an okay year, but it leaves a sour taste in their mouth, right? So I think the problem for the Dragons, and this goes back to their for and against, when they were off, they were well off. They were really, really bad.
Second half against the Bulldogs.
Yeah.
That's one that stuck in my mind.
Well, they lost 44-12 that game.
Yeah, and it was 12-10 at halftime or something.
So when they fell away, and that was probably a disappointing thing, because even in the last couple of years when they haven't been great, they haven't been blown off the park as consistently as they were in 2024. So that was certainly a concern for Shane Flanagan and the Dragons. But you sit there and you break down the season and you look at the improvements of some of those players and their fitness level. You look at, I know he's gone Zach Lomax's form this year.
Yep.
Career best.
Clearly.
Moses Sully looked really damaging. Jaden Sewer got back to, his origin level of standard.
Played well.
Luciano Leilua had an interrupted start to the year. By the back end of the year was getting destructive.
Francis Molo.
Francis Molo played as well as he has since he arrived at the club.
Correct.
Kyle Flanagan was really good for him and a really calming voice in the halves and directed that side around. Jacob Little played his best season in the NRL.
Agree.
So there's all these nuggets of positivity around the Dragons. The fact is that they just couldn't put it together when the moment mattered.
Okay, 60 points to 18 on Anzac Day.
Yep.
That was a home game for the Dragons too. So that was a tough one for Dragons fans.
There was just lots of those games, Jimmy. Like North Queensland, they lost 46-24. There was lots of these games where it just ran away from them. And when they capitulated, they fell into a massive heap and couldn't find their way out of it.
And here's my concern for the Dragons if we start to cast ourselves forward to 2025. Whenever they were good, whenever they were doing, I remember the game against the West Tigers where they just exploded in the second half. They did the same against the Warriors on a Friday night down there at Wynn Stadium. It was all Ben Hunt and Zach Lomax.
Well, their 3 best players, Zach Lomax and Jaden Sewer were their best players this year. Right?
Ben Hunt had 30 try assists and 17 line break assists in 22 games, mate.
I get that. I understand all that. He touches the ball more than anyone did in that side, right? And but if we're looking at the positivity, you've got to be critical around Ben Hunt. When they needed him to step up in the last month of the season, he was nowhere to be seen. He had a shocker against Parramatta. Well, probably his worst game as a Dragons player.
Yep.
Right. Defensively, he'd made his mark defensively. Like he was a really good defensive half. He was really, really poor. Right. So I think that change and that break needed to happen. But you're right. Their best players, Ben Hunt's been their best player over the last 5 years. right? He's gone. Their best player or the second best player this year, Zach Lomax, is gone.
Yep.
That's massive holes to fill.
Totally.
Right? Particularly Zach Lomax had an X factor that hadn't been present at the Dragons for a long, long time.
He had the capacity to create something out of nothing. And
they
whether it
haven't
was
had
just
that.
chasing a kick.
Yeah.
You know, what a threat that he was. And that's why I always believe he's a more valuable winger than Brian To'o. You know, Brian To'o's been superbly consistent for 5 years.
Yeah.
But Lomax is this X factor. He kicks goals from the sideline in State of Origin deciders to level it all up. Like, who does that?
He has the total package, Zach Lomax, and it's why he was paid so highly by the Dragons and on a long-term deal.
Yes.
But this year was the first year they got value for money for him.
So if I go from Ben Hunt, and I talked about that. So my concern now for the Dragons is, where do your points come? Because if it's not Ben Hunt passing to Zach Lomax, it's Ben Hunt kicking for Zach Lomax.
Yeah.
And the next best on that try-assist list, Tyrell Sloan at 41, and he's going to be playing on the wing.
Yeah.
And Gutho's not a try-assist guy. There's a lot of things Gutho is. He's not a try-assist guy.
Sloan doesn't have the X factor that Zach Lomax produced, but he has the capability to have some X factor. And the test for the Dragons will be how much they can get him involved so he doesn't get lost on the wing. Because we've seen him. He's got attacking brilliance. His challenges are going to be tough carries coming out of his own end.
Yep.
You know, can he make those tough carries? Because Zach Lomax is such a strong carrier of the
So
ball.
good.
Right? And they've got their back five, like, were pretty, except for Sloan. So, you know, Christian Tuipulotu was really good at the back end of the year in terms of his carries. Sully was strong.
Yep.
Right? They've signed Valentine Holmes as a good carrier of the football.
Yep.
So, you know, they've got that mix there, and Val Holmes has to come up with some sort of game-breaking ability as well. And his year was poor for North Queensland. He started the year was poor. He finished well, Val Holmes.
Yeah, Val was a question mark for me. I saw him in some games where you just went,
I wouldn't have picked him in Origin. I said around when Queensland were talking Origin, I would have overlooked him based on form.
Yeah, but they don't do that, Queensland.
They don't do that.
But in the end, they were beaten. So, look, what we do know with Shane Flanagan, he has the capacity to bring older players who we think maybe haven't got a whole lot of their best footy left in them, and can do that. He did it at the Sharks, and he won famously that premiership.
Yep.
So a guy like Val Holmes, who was the youngster there at the Sharks at that time, a Damien Cook, who comes into the squad, and all the off-field stuff's great, but you've got to get him on-field as well, and creating there. And that maybe then creates an opportunity or tension with Jacob Little, who, as you mentioned, was one of their best players. I'm concerned about their capacity to score points. I'm not concerned of them about their fitness levels.
Yes.
And their ability to defend, which needs to improve based on what we saw this year.
And I think that's the improvement for the Dragons in 2025 will be those things that you touched on. The tenacity, they're going to be more representation of what Shane Flanagan wants to be as a team. That's gritty, that's tough. You remember those Cronulla very rarely got blown out of the park when they were in that peak period, and they'd win 16-4, like grind teams, and then have the brilliance of a Ben Barber or a James Maloney or a Val Holmes or someone like that to turn the game for him. The Dragons don't have that.
I was going to say, it's a Ben Barber scrum move that is the crucial point in a grand final. That's the type of thing. All right, and you make a very good point. Dragons fans, there were some people, not you, but suggested that they would run last.
Second last I had them.
And they've finished up 11th. But what's your grading for the Dragons?
I'm going to give them a B.
A B?
A B. Based on the conversation that we would have had at the start of the year.
Okay.
That's how I'm judging them. You're looking at them. That's why the Broncos got an F. Because it's around expectation heading into the year.
I've got them a C.
Yeah.
The Dragons.
It's B or C for mine, yeah.
Okay.
But I think the year was significant improvement. If they made the top 8, I would have given them an A. Even if they got pumped first week of the finals, I would have given them an A just because no one had them in their top 8. So that's why I've got them. That's why I've given them a B.
All right, Dragons fans, what do you think? We're being too kind, too harsh? You let us know. Who's your halves?
It'll be Ilias and Flanagan.
Ilias and Flanagan. See, my concern around that is, I think Ilias is a 14, and I think Kyle Flanagan's a 14.
Yeah.
So that's my how is Ilias and Flanagan and Gutherson
who's the running threat? Who's the running threat there is my question. That is my question for the Dragons. Who is the guy with the defense? Like Kyle can organise really well, right? Kyle's a really well structured half. Off the cuff, what can he create? And it's the same with Ilias. What can these guys create? And Gutherson's strength is being everywhere.
Yep.
Right? Not creating, but playing off the back of creativity is Gutherson's strength. Who is doing that? That is a huge question mark. That's why they've signed Daniel Atkinson for 2026 because they need a run in half.
Yeah.
That's what they need. They need some speed in that half combination. But I still think if you look at their strike, so if you got Sully and Holmes, Leilua and Sua on either edge, that's some strike. But you just got to get them in the right position.
1300 01 1170 0457 736 736. Get us on that Guildford Hotel open line. All right. Lots and lots of texts. We'll get to them very shortly. You're listening to The Boys of Summer with Michael Carayannis and Jimmy Smith.